The first time my daughter told me not to marry the man I loved, she was standing in my kitchen holding a copy of my bank statement. She had highlighted 3 withdrawals, circled my fiancé's name, and written the word warning across the top in red ink. My son stood beside her with his arms folded and said, "Mom, people your age get taken advantage of every day." People your age. I was 58, not confused, not helpless, not lonely enough to hand my life to the first man who smiled at me. But my children had already decided that love after widowhood must be a mistake, and that protecting me meant controlling me. They tried to stop the wedding. What they did not know was that the withdrawals had nothing to do with my fiancé taking money from me. They were connected to a decision their father had made before he died, and a secret I had carried for 7 years. My husband, Richard, died when I was 51. We had been married for 28 years. We raised 2 children in a brick house outside Kansas City, Missouri. Our daughter, Allison, was 32 when this happened. Our son, Brian, was 29. Richard and I built a good marriage, not a perfect one. We argued about money, his work hours, my habit of taking care of everyone before myself, and his inability to throw away anything made of wood or metal. He owned a small plumbing supply company with a business partner. I taught high school English for nearly 3 decades. We had routine: Sunday coffee, Friday takeout, 1 long road trip every summer. We were not passionate in the way movies define passion. We were known. That felt deeper. Then Richard had a heart attack while unloading boxes at the warehouse. He died before I reached the hospital. There was no long goodbye, no final conversation, no chance to ask whether he knew how much of my identity had grown around our shared life. After the funeral, people surrounded me. The children came every day. My sister stayed for 3 weeks. Neighbors brought casseroles until my freezer could not close. Then everyone returned to living. That is what happens after death. The world does not become cruel. It becomes busy. I retired from teaching 2 years later. At first, retirement felt like another loss. No bells, no essays, no students needing recommendations. The house became painfully quiet. Allison lived 20 minutes away with her husband, Mark, and their 2 children. Brian worked in commercial real estate and traveled often. They loved me. They checked on me. They also began managing me in small ways. Allison scheduled medical appointments without asking. Brian reviewed my investments, just to be safe. They discussed my roof, my driving, my travel, and my diet, as though I were becoming a family project. I tolerated it because their attention came from grief and fear. They had lost one parent suddenly. They wanted to prevent losing another. But care can become control so gradually that no one notices when the line is crossed. I met Samuel Green at a community theater rehearsal. I had agreed to help with costumes for a production of Our Town because my friend Denise refused to accept my third excuse. Samuel was 62, divorced, and building sets. He was not handsome in an obvious way. He had silver hair, kind eyes, and a scar across one eyebrow from a childhood accident. He wore old work shirts and measured everything twice. The first evening, I handed him a curtain panel and said, "This is 6 inches too short." He replied, "Then it has something in common with my first marriage." I laughed before I could stop myself. Samuel had been an electrical engineer for a manufacturing company. He retired early after a corporate merger and spent his time volunteering, repairing furniture, and helping his younger brother manage a small farm. He had one daughter, Leah, who lived in Oregon. He spoke about his divorce without blaming his ex-wife. "We stayed married long after we stopped being honest," he said. That sentence impressed me. Samuel and I began drinking coffee after rehearsals, then having dinner, then taking long walks through neighborhoods where neither of us lived. I did not tell my children immediately, not because I was ashamed, because I knew they would turn something gentle into an investigation. For 4 months, Samuel existed only in the part of my life that belonged to me. That secrecy felt exciting. It also felt dishonest. When I finally told Allison, she became very still. "How old is he?" 62. "What does he do?" He is retired. From what? Engineering. Does he have money? I laughed. That is your first concern? It is a practical question. No, it is an intrusive question. She looked hurt. I'm protecting you. From dinner? From people who target widows. Samuel had never asked me for money. He paid for half our dinners, I paid for half, and sometimes one of us paid because relationships do not require a receipt ledger. Brian reacted differently. He searched Samuel online. He found his former employer, divorce record, property information, and a lawsuit involving a business partnership from 15 years earlier. He emailed me links. Subject line: please read before this gets serious. I called him. Did you run a background check? I used public information. Without asking me. You would not have agreed. That should have answered the question. He said Samuel had been sued for breach of contract. I had already heard the story from Samuel. He invested in a friend's solar installation company. The business failed. Investors sued everyone involved. The matter settled without admission of wrongdoing. Brian said, that is what he told you. Yes. And you believe him? Yes. Why? Because I have judgment. He sighed in the tone people use when they believe someone older is being stubborn. That tone became common. The children met Samuel at my house. He brought wine and flowers. Allison watched him as though he might steal the silverware. Brian asked direct questions about retirement income, debt, and where Samuel planned to live if things progressed. Samuel answered calmly at first. Then he said, I'm here to meet your family, not interview for control of your mother's assets. Brian replied, if your intentions are good, you shouldn't mind. I stood. That is enough. The evening ended early. After they left, I apologized. Samuel said, they're scared. They're rude. Both can be true. That was one of the things I loved about him. He could hold more than one truth without using complexity to avoid accountability. Our relationship deepened over the next year. Samuel did not try to replace Richard. He asked about him. He listened when I told stories. Once, we were sorting old holiday decorations when Samuel found Richard's handwriting on a box. I began crying. Samuel sat beside me on the basement floor. He did not say I had to move on. He did not say, Richard would want me happy. He said, you miss being known by someone who remembers the earlier versions of you. That was exactly it. Samuel knew me as a widow. Richard had known me as a young teacher, a new mother, a frightened homeowner, and a woman who once dyed her hair red and regretted it. Loving Samuel did not erase Richard. It created a new part of life after him. My children did not understand that. They treated love as a limited inheritance. If I gave some to Samuel, they believed I took it from their father. The first major conflict came when Samuel and I traveled to Santa Fe. We paid separately. We booked separate rooms because I was not ready to share that part of our relationship with my children or anyone else. Allison called the hotel after I missed one text. I was in a museum. When I returned, the front desk said my daughter had requested a wellness check. I was furious. Allison said, you could have been in trouble. I was looking at paintings. You were traveling with a man we barely know. I know him. She answered, you think you do. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was true, because it showed she no longer believed my experience belonged to me. Samuel proposed 6 months later. We were sitting on my back porch during a thunderstorm. No restaurant, no ring hidden in food. He took my hand and said, I don't want to merge our histories. I want to build the next one with you. Then he showed me a simple gold ring with a small sapphire. I said yes. I also cried for Richard. Samuel understood. The children did not. Allison left the room when I announced it. Brian said, this is too fast. We had been together nearly 2 years. I asked what timeline would satisfy him. He said, I don't know. Longer. Allison returned and said, Dad has only been gone 7 years. Only. Grief has strange arithmetic. 7 years was both yesterday and a significant portion of my remaining life. I said, Your father is not coming back. Allison flinched. I regretted the bluntness. Then I said, I loved him. I still love him. But I am alive. She replied, so were we. The sentence revealed another layer. My remarriage was not only about their father, it was about their place. They feared a new husband would change inheritance, holidays, access, and family identity. Brian asked whether we had discussed a prenup. Yes. That surprised him. Samuel and I had already met with separate attorneys. My house, investments, pension, and Richard's remaining assets would stay mine. Samuel's home, retirement accounts, and family farm share would remain his. We created plans for medical decisions, shared expenses, and inheritance. Both children would remain beneficiaries of my estate. Samuel's daughter would remain beneficiary of his. The wedding would not merge everything. It would formalize companionship, care, and commitment. I explained this. Brian said, then why marry? I looked at him. Because money is not the only reason adults make decisions. He became embarrassed. Still, the resistance continued. Allison suggested a commitment ceremony without legal marriage. Brian offered to pay for a long vacation instead. They spoke to my sister. They contacted Samuel's daughter. Leah surprised them by supporting us. My dad is happier than he has been in years, she told Allison. Allison replied, you don't know what he wants from our mother. Leah answered, and you don't know what your mother wants from him. That ended the call. The bank statement appeared 3 months before the wedding. Allison had access to one of my accounts because she helped manage bills during a knee surgery the previous year. I had forgotten to remove her online access. She noticed 3 withdrawals totaling $45,000. Each transfer went to an account connected to Green Heritage Farm, LLC, a company partly owned by Samuel and his brother. She printed the statements. She and Brian arrived without warning. That was the kitchen confrontation. Allison placed the papers on the table. What is this? I looked at them. It is private. It is $45,000. I can read. Brian said, did Samuel ask you for this? No. Then why did you send it? I am not discussing my finances while you interrogate me in my home. Allison began crying. Mom, he is taking your money before the wedding. Samuel was not there. I was glad. I said, leave. Brian refused. We need to stop this. You need to leave. He said he would contact my bank, attorney, and possibly adult protective services. That was when my anger became something colder. You believe I am incompetent? No. Then what would you report? Financial exploitation. By a man who did not receive the money? They stared. The account name contained Green, but Samuel did not control it alone. The money was not a gift to him. It was repayment. Years earlier, Richard had quietly invested in Green Heritage Farm through Samuel's brother, Peter. I did not know Samuel then. The investment happened after Richard's supply company began purchasing reclaimed wood and custom fixtures from the farm's workshop. Richard loaned Peter $60,000 to prevent foreclosure during a drought and business downturn. The agreement was poorly documented but real. After Richard died, I discovered a promissory note in his office. Peter had repaid $15,000. Then his health failed. For years, I did not pursue the balance. When I began dating Samuel and learned Peter was his brother, I was shocked. Samuel was more shocked. He had never known Richard was the lender because Peter handled the agreement privately. The remaining $45,000 was owed to me, but Peter still could not pay. The farm was preparing to sell a parcel of land. Instead of taking repayment in cash, I agreed to contribute the $45,000 back into a conservation fund that would protect the remaining property and settle Richard's old loan on paper. The withdrawals were not Samuel taking money. They were me choosing what to do with money that had once belonged to Richard. That was the midpoint revelation. Allison stared at me. Why didn't you tell us? Because it was between your father, Peter, and me. We are his children. You are not automatically entitled to every financial detail of your father's life. Brian looked at the transfers. Why give it back? I did not give it to Samuel. It benefits his family. It protects farmland, settles a debt, and honors an agreement your father chose. Brian said, Dad would never want this. I walked to the hall cabinet and removed the original promissory note. Attached was a handwritten letter from Richard. If Peter cannot repay and the land is at risk, I would rather the money preserve the farm than disappear into legal fees. Margaret will know what is right. My name is Margaret. Richard had trusted me to decide. My children had not. Allison read the letter and cried. For one moment, I thought the conflict would end. Then Brian said, Samuel could have influenced you. I stared at him. Even your father's handwriting is not enough? He said he was only being cautious. I answered, Caution without respect becomes control. They left angry. 2 weeks later, they contacted the wedding venue. They claimed there might be a family emergency and asked about cancellation terms. The coordinator called me because the contract was in my name. I felt humiliated. Then Brian contacted my attorney and requested confirmation of my mental capacity. My attorney, Helen Park, called me personally. She said, I cannot discuss your affairs with him, but you should know he is concerned. Concerned enough to treat me like a case file. Helen asked whether I wanted to change account permissions, medical proxies, or estate documents. I said yes, not out of revenge, because my children had shown they would use access against my stated wishes. I removed Allison from the bank account. I replaced Brian as backup financial power of attorney with my sister, Diane. I kept both children as estate beneficiaries, but placed certain inheritances in trusts managed independently. Then I told them. Allison was devastated. You're punishing us. I'm changing authority you misused. We were trying to protect you. You tried to cancel my wedding and question my capacity. Brian said, because you're not acting like yourself. I replied, you mean I'm not acting like the version of me that asked permission? That ended the conversation. They stopped speaking to me for 3 weeks. The wedding date approached. I ordered flowers. Samuel chose music. Leah agreed to stand beside him. My sister stood beside me. I told myself I could marry without my children. That was true legally. Emotionally, it was unbearable. Samuel said, we can postpone. No. If they need time, they have had time. I don't want our wedding to become proof that you chose me over them. I am not choosing between people. I am choosing against control. Still, doubt grew. Was I moving too fast? Had grief made Samuel feel more essential than he was? Were my children seeing something I refused to see? I asked Helen to review every legal and financial arrangement again. I met with a therapist alone. I asked Samuel difficult questions about debt, health, expectations, and care. He answered. Then he asked me something equally difficult. If your children never accept me, will you resent me? I thought carefully. No, but I may grieve them inside our marriage. I can live with grief. I cannot live as the reason you deny it. That was why I trusted him. He did not demand victory. He asked for truth. The stronger final revelation came 1 week before the wedding. Brian asked to meet privately. We sat at a diner. He looked exhausted. He said the family business Richard had left behind contained another secret. After Richard died, the business was sold to his partner. Brian believed the sale proceeds had been divided fairly. They had not. Richard had created a separate account containing nearly $200,000 from a life insurance policy connected to the company. The money was intended to support me. I knew about it. Brian had recently discovered it while reviewing old tax documents. He believed the account should eventually pass to him and Allison. That expectation fueled his panic over the farm transfers and marriage. He was not only afraid Samuel would hurt me, he was afraid my choices would reduce his inheritance. I asked, did you tell Allison? No. Why? I wanted to confirm everything first. Why tell me now? He looked down. Because I realized I was calculating. The honesty surprised me, he continued. I kept saying Dad's legacy, but I was thinking about money. That was the final revelation. Not a criminal scheme, not a hidden villain, a grown son who confused future inheritance with security and moral authority. He began crying. I'm ashamed. I reached across the table. I believe you were scared too. I was. Both can be true. Samuel's phrase had become mine. Brian said he's still worried about the marriage. I know. But I don't have the right to stop it. No. He nodded. I'm sorry. That apology did not erase everything. It opened a door. Allison's change came slower. Brian told her about the insurance account and his motives. She called me. At first, she defended herself. She said her concern was never money. Then she admitted something different. After Richard died, she had become the child who handled emergencies, appointments, meals, paperwork, grandchildren's schedules. Helping me made her feel close to him because it gave her a role inside the family structure he left. Samuel threatened that role. If you have him, she said, you won't need me. The words broke my heart. I want you. That is not the same as needing you to manage me. She cried. I don't know how to be your daughter if I'm not helping. Then learn who I am when nothing is wrong. That sentence changed us. Allison and Brian attended the wedding. Not as enthusiastic supporters at first, as children choosing relationship over control. The ceremony took place at a small vineyard outside the city. 50 guests, no elaborate decorations. I wore a soft blue dress instead of white. Samuel wore the same navy suit he had owned for 10 years. Before walking down the aisle, I held a photograph of Richard, not publicly, in the bridal room. I said, "Thank you for trusting me to know what is right." Then I placed the photograph in my bag. Allison walked with me. Halfway down the aisle, she whispered, "You look happy." "I am." She squeezed my hand. At the front, Samuel did not look triumphant. He looked grateful. Our vows included no promises to erase the past. We promised companionship, honesty, care, and room for the people we had loved before. Brian gave a short toast. He said, I spent months trying to protect my mother from making a decision. I forgot she was the person who taught me how to make one. That was enough. The marriage required adjustment. Samuel moved into my house after we renovated the basement into a workshop. We kept separate accounts and one joint household account. The prenup remained. The children gradually relaxed. Then real difficulty arrived. 18 months after the wedding, Samuel developed prostate cancer. It was treatable, but the diagnosis frightened everyone. Allison immediately took over scheduling instincts, then stopped herself. She asked, "Do you want help?" I said yes. That question showed change. Brian reviewed insurance options only after Samuel invited him. Leah stayed with us during surgery. Our blended family formed not through a ceremony, but through crisis handled with consent. Samuel recovered. During treatment, I sometimes wondered whether my children had been right about one thing. Marriage at our age carried risk, illness, loss, financial complexity. But avoiding love would not eliminate risk. It would only eliminate partnership. My children had imagined they could protect me from grief by preventing attachment. They had already watched me survive grief. What they needed to learn was that survival did not require permanent isolation. The Farm Conservation Fund succeeded. Peter died 2 years after our wedding. The protected land now supports a training program for young farmers and woodworking apprentices. A small plaque honors Richard's early support. It also names Samuel's family. Our histories meet there without competing. The $45,000 became something living. Richard's insurance account remains mine. I used part of it to fund education accounts for the grandchildren. Not because Brian exposed it, because I chose to. The rest supports my retirement and long-term care planning. My children understand now that inheritance begins after a person has finished needing their own resources. That sentence should not be controversial. In many families, it is. Allison and I attended therapy together for several months. She learned to ask before helping. I learned not to reject help simply to prove independence. Brian apologized to Samuel directly. Samuel said, "You were protecting someone you love." Brian replied, "I was also protecting what I thought I might receive." Samuel nodded. Knowing both is useful. They now repair things together. Badly. I hire professionals afterward. At 63, I became a grandmother again. Allison named her daughter Grace. She asked me to stay for 1 week after the birth. Not indefinitely. Not as an obligation. I went gladly. Samuel came for 2 days and returned home because he understood the visit was about mother and daughter. Boundaries did not reduce love. They made it easier to choose. People who hear my story sometimes frame it as children trying to save their widowed mother from a gold digger. Samuel was not one, but even if their concerns had been more justified, they still needed to speak with respect, evidence, and limits. Adult children do not become owners of a parent's future because they fear losing the past. Parents also owe honesty. I should have removed Allison's account access earlier. I should have explained the farm transaction before it appeared as a suspicious transfer. Privacy is not secrecy, but I used silence partly because I expected criticism. That made discovery more dramatic. Still, the decision remained mine. That is the line our family finally learned. Concern can ask. Concern can advise. Concern can investigate obvious fraud with care. Concern cannot cancel contracts, seize authority, or treat disagreement as incompetence. Samuel and I have been married 5 years now. We are not a romantic miracle. We argue about noise, thermostat settings, and his habit of saving bent screws. We travel, we volunteer, we care for one another. Some evenings we sit on the porch without speaking. The silence feels different from widowhood. It is shared. Richard remains part of my life. His photographs are still in the house. Samuel's are beside them. Love did not replace love. Life expanded. That was the truth my children could not understand until they saw it. At 58, I did not fall in love because I forgot my husband. I fell in love because I remembered what it felt like to be known and chose not to spend the rest of my life treating companionship as betrayal. My children tried to stop the wedding because fear convinced them control was devotion. I married anyway, not to defy them, not to prove age had not changed me. I married because my judgment still belonged to me. Years later, when Allison worries I am taking on too much, or Brian questions a financial choice, they begin differently. Can we ask? Most of the time, I say yes. Sometimes I say no, and the relationship survives. That may be the greatest proof that our family healed. Not that they approved of every choice, that they finally learned love can remain after authority ends. A year after Samuel's recovery, our family returned to the vineyard for dinner. There was no ceremony, only a long table beneath string lights. Allison brought old photographs of Richard. Leah brought pictures of Samuel as a young father. Brian brought nothing and claimed that was his contribution to keeping the evening simple. At one point, my granddaughter asked why I had 2 wedding rings in the jewelry box she had seen while helping me dress. I told her one belonged to the life I had with Richard and one belonged to the life I had with Samuel. She asked which one I loved more. The adults became quiet. I said, "They belong to different promises." That answer seemed enough for her. It became enough for me, too. For years, I had feared that choosing happiness again required ranking the men, marriages, and families in my life. It did not. Richard gave me history, children, and decades of partnership. Samuel gave me companionship after loss and the courage to stop apologizing for still being alive. My children gave me love complicated by fear. I gave them boundaries complicated by anger. None of us behaved perfectly. We learned anyway. The vineyard owner remembered our wedding and asked whether we wanted to recreate a photograph. We stood near the same row of vines. This time, the children joined us. No one was positioned as a replacement. No one was excluded to protect a memory. When the photograph arrived, I placed it beside the older one from my first marriage. 2 frames, 1 shelf, a whole life rather than competing chapters. That is what I wish I had understood sooner. Starting again does not erase what came before. It reveals whether the people who love you can make room for who you are becoming. My children tried to stop my wedding because they believed family safety meant keeping everything familiar. The wedding taught us the opposite. Sometimes a family survives only after it allows something new to begin.